let's do it. All right, hi guys, it's Randy with Direct Action Combat Performance.
Hey guys, and Sam from Adaptive State Performance.
Thanks for the feedback, thanks for the comments. As always, Sam and I are going to sift through them and we'll address the questions as they come in. And one of the questions was posed on the YouTube channel from a gentleman who wants to know, he put the question in the context that JTF2 and CSOR is the same thing. So we'll first address that question, but his question really is about home life balance and how much time the guys are on the road. So we'll address that. And throughout these segments, guys, if there's stuff specifically that you want to talk about, please let us know. And Sam and I will address those questions. And it could be elaboration. So I know in the past we did answer a question from one viewer, and then when we responded, that viewer also commented again and said, well, it wasn't exactly what I was asking. So sometimes, when we're reading them, we might not fully understand what it is that you're asking. So no problem. You can either send one of us an email, or by all means use the comment box and we'll address it to ensure that we are answering it to the best of our ability given the context of the question where it's coming from. Okay, so sometimes there could be some confusion and we'll make sure that we clarify it as we can. All right, so question today is, what was it again?
So kind of going between what's the difference between CSOR and JTF2 first, because I know you wanted to address that.
Right, so very common that when people talk about Canadian Special Forces, it gets kind of blanketed in anyone that is within the Canadian Special Forces, they're all the same, which is not the case. And I just want to clarify, for under the umbrella of Canadian Special Forces, so CANSOFCOM is Canadian Special Operations Force Command. It's a big mouthful, but what it is it's a command structure, and think of it from an umbrella, and under the umbrella there are pillars of units. One unit is referred to as CJIRU, so that's the Canadian Joint Incident Response Unit, and they are located in Trenton, Ontario. And those guys are, for viewers that are not aware, those guys are really a force multiplier and an enhanced capability from an international perspective, and we have them right here in Canada. We're really lucky. Anything that has to do with chemical, biological, or nuclear type of warfare, these guys are the guys that have the big brains behind the science to what is a legitimate danger or threat to our potential society, both domestically and abroad. However, their mandate is primarily domestic. All right, so really important group of guys. We're really lucky to have them on our side, but that would be CJIRU. And then another pillar would be 427 Squadron, or the Special Operations Aviation Squadron, based out of Petawawa. So those guys are airlift. They're the ones that either fixed wing or rotary wing. Those are the ones that not only help get us from point A to point B when we're trying to do the job, but they're also the ones that will transport goods and transport components of anything that's special operations readily accessible or needed for operations or training. So those guys are an important role as well. And then CSOR is the Canadian Special Operations Regiment. They're also in Petawawa, and they are what would sometimes be referred to as an equivalent of a Ranger Battalion or a Green Beret Battalion, where they do some jobs that are similar to JTF2, but the mandate is very, very different. So although the uniforms look very similar and some of the job looks very similar, the selection is very different. The way and what they're selecting for is very different. And then at the end of the day, the mandate is really what makes the biggest difference. So JTF2 is Joint Task Force 2, and they're based out of Ottawa. And the two major differences is really the mandate. So JTF2's responsibility is hostage rescue and counterterrorism, where CSOR doesn't do hostage rescue. So that's the biggest difference. JTF2 does direct action missions, although CSOR would be in support of direct action missions. They don't lead direct action missions. So very, very different in terms of the lines of operation. Some similarities are, some of the hands and feet skills, shooting ability, stuff like that, very, very similar. The uniform is the same, so it looks very, very similar. The job is very, very different. And to answer this gentleman's question, how much are the guys away? Everybody in the command is busy. Anybody that says they're not, they're mistaken. No matter if you're at CJIRU, 427 Squadron, CSOR or JTF2, everybody in the command is extremely busy and very mission oriented and very mission focused. So when the guys are not training, they're on operation. When they're not operation, they're training for the next potential operation. So they're busy. To answer your question, how much are they home? How much are they away? Every year is different. From my experience, I would say on average. So I was at the unit with the JTF2 for 16 years, and I would say on average, I was away from home probably over, collectively altogether about 5 months a year. So 5 months a year I was on the road, whether that was, a 2-week training iteration, down the States, or that was a 3-month deployment overseas. And you add it all together, you push it, smash it all together, it would probably be the accumulation of about 5 months. So roughly, I would say on average, 5 months I was on the road. And in those times where you're home, routine daily training would still, would be a normality. So Monday to Friday, if we're here in Ottawa, we'd still show up, do our routine training, whatever that might be. Sometimes, force capability enhancement, sometimes it's routine training, and sometimes it's just a brush up or refresher training and stuff that we haven't touched in a while. So that's what a typical kind of week would look like while we're here in Canada. How that would affect home life? Well, everybody is a little bit different. For me, the majority of my career, I was single, so the home life was most likely happy just being away and on the road. When things change and you have children to take care of and families to take care of for guys that are in those situations, it's a little bit different. So the strain can be a little bit more amplified when the tempo is relentless. How do you deal with that? Everybody is a little bit different. There was a lot of components of physical outlets that guys would rely on. They would also spend time with buddies that have similar struggles, and they would bounce things off each other. So everybody was a little bit different. But I know I'm kind of giving you a broad brush over what it looks like, but the reality is JTF2 and CSOR, very, very different. Both units are very proactive and they're doing really good things, and they're busy. So it is very different home life, how much the guys are on the road, how much they're home. Every year is a little bit different, but I would say on average for a JTF2 Assaulter, on average, they're probably away 5 months a year. And then CSOR guys, I'm not 100% sure because I was never there, but I know with buddies that are there, with buddies who served there, they had told me that the tempo is not much different.
Right. Was there any years in your 16 years where you were away significantly more than 5 months? Like, was there any years where you were gone for 10 months of the year, or anything extreme, or maybe even the opposite, where it was only less than a month?
I would say the maximum I was away was probably, without really opening up a calendar and calculating the exact time away, I would say close to 9 months would be a really busy year, and that just happened to be like maybe a deployment. Pre-deployment it's busy, so what you're getting ready for deployment, and then when you're away, those deployments were usually 4, sometimes 5 months. Then you come back, then typically go on some leave, take some time off. When the moment you're off, the time is expended, then you're busy again. You're right into another cycle of either training, supporting training, away for training, career courses. So there was a couple of years where I can remember, it wouldn't be uncommon, 8 or 9 months where I was away, busy. And then I would say the opposite was maybe a more shallow year would have been maybe 2 months maybe on the road. So vast differences, but I would say on average it's probably about 5 months and put it all together.
Would you say that a lot of the guys that you were in with were similar to you, maybe after the beginning, also single? Did you notice a pattern where a lot of guys at the beginning were single and then became, married or in relationships as time went on? Was there like a huge spectrum of where people were at in their life stages when it came to like balancing home life, or was there like a consistent pattern? Did you notice any trends?
I did notice some trends where early in my career, a lot of folks that came to the unit were single. And then I did notice the trend started to shift over the years where it was more mature guys that were showing up. So they were already established. They either already had 1 or 2 kids or a kid on the way, and they were on course. So an added component of struggled, to be completely honest. But they managed. These guys were and are, doing it. They're figuring out ways to, manage the tempo at the unit, maintain a healthy home life at home, and they're doing what they can with the tempo. So over the years, I did see, a gradual change where a little less single, young 23, 24-year-old, more established, late 20s, early 30-year-old, to the point where when guys were on course, a lot of them were either married with kids already or in the process of having kids. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I would say probably right now, well, at least when I left a couple of years ago, I would say the average was probably 35, 34 years old. And then it was literally almost cut in the middle, 50-50. 50% of the guys that were active had families, had, kids, married, and then 50% of the guys were single and single and sassy and ready to get after it.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, so a good mix. I would say 50-50.
What is the average amount of time that somebody stays in the unit? Like years? Is there a ballpark number?
Ballpark number, yeah. I would say wouldn't be uncommon for a guy to do, on average, a 15-year career at the unit.
Wow.
Yeah, not uncommon at all. Yeah, it's a long time. And then some guys that were very fortunate to come into the unit even younger, they potentially could do 20 years. They could do almost their entire career at the unit when they get in so young.
Right.
And then I would say there's a handful of folks too that do it for maybe 4 or 5 years, and then they move on to do something else, either because life has changed, family situation has changed, or they had their fulfillment and they move on. But typically the people that get there, because the demand is so high to get there, and the training and preparation to get there is so grueling. Typically, once guys get there, they're embedded. They stick around for quite some time. Yeah.
Is there some kind of shuffling around of people within those 4 divisions of NSOFCOM that you were mentioning?
Yeah.
How often do you notice people shifting from maybe CSOR to CGIRO or something like that, moving around?
Yeah, that's a good question. So very common, actually. You see guys maybe do CGIRO for a few years, and then maybe they'll try out for CSOR or JTF2. You'll see guys do CSOR for a couple of years, and then they try out for JTF2. But you don't see guys go from JTF2 to one of the other units very often. That's typically not the way it works. And I just think it's because, again, like I talked about at the beginning of the chat, it's the mandate, right? Like, not uncommon for guys to want to get a feel for special forces and then really challenge themselves to go to, the pinnacle. So the tier 1 organization is JTF2. So it's like that. It's the highest that you can get in the Canadian Armed Forces. So it can be daunting. So it's not uncommon for a guy to maybe test the waters a little bit. If he's a little bit younger, go to CSOR, go to CGIRO for a couple of years, gain some experience with the overall command structure. And then, he'll put his hand in and put his notice of intent to try out for JTF2 at a later date. Maybe a couple of years, maybe 3 years. That's not uncommon. It's also not uncommon for guys to get to a position, whether CSOR or CGIRO, and really find their way and really get embedded into what they're doing and end up loving it. So they might have the thought process at the beginning, I'll do this for a couple of years, and then maybe I'll go try out for JTF2. But then once they get there, they're like, you know what, I really like it here. I'm good right here. Right? So yeah, you do see it. More often than not, you'll see guys do a couple of years at one of the other units and then try out for JTF2.
Right.
Yeah, more often than not.
Is that valuable experience to have first?
I think so, yeah.
Like there is carryover even though the mandates and things are different because there's overlap with training and things
There is, yeah. I think there's some overlap in training. There are sometimes some bad habits that get created. Bad habits, it's maybe not the right terminology.
Different
habits. There's different habits that they might bring from their previous unit that if they are selected, it's because they've proven that they're teachable, which means they can adapt. So they might bring certain bad habits or different habits from their previous unit, and then when they end up with JTF2, the training cadre will share components of how to polish it. Like what you're doing is not wrong, but there's just another way to do it, and the reason that we do it this way is for the following reasons. So let's kind of polish that up a little bit. And that's kind of the way it goes. It's not uncommon at all for guys to bring so much knowledge and crossover in training and understanding of the greater component of special forces, so they'll bring that with them when they try out. It tends to be a benefit for them and for the unit, which is really what it's all about. It's the bigger picture, right? It's the bigger image of what the collective can do together is, in my opinion anyway, more important than one individual's ability to be a really good shooter. Okay, sure, that's important, but it's really not that important when you talk about the bigger picture of things. You know, can somebody not only do the job, but can they think critically on their own? Can they work autonomously? Can they make wise decisions knowing that the decisions that they're going to make, you know, have some, you know, grave circumstances? In some of those things are teachable, some of those things are not. Either people have them or they don't. So I do, to answer your question, I do think that it does benefit them, but it also benefits the unit when individuals come from previous places within the command and then you know, excel with JTF2.
Right.
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, so hopefully that answers that question. It's a really good question. The guys are busy, no matter where they are within the command. They are busy. They are on the road a lot. They're always pushing the envelope, trying to polish their skills, trying to improve capabilities, trying to enhance capabilities. So the guys are doing really good work. I think if you're out there and you're in the Canadian Armed Forces and you're considering life in the Special Forces fast lane, I think you'd be very proud of what you're doing. You'd be happy that you made those decisions, and then you'd also be pleasantly surprised that the tempo is very high.
Yeah, I feel like when you were talking about how much time you would spend away on an average year, it must depend on what's going on in the world. Of course, like that's probably the biggest factor, because the training is probably pretty consistent and constantly evolving, but depending, you know, something like what's happening in Ukraine right now, or back when, you know, a lot of guys were in Afghanistan and things like that, then that would probably contribute to being away a whole lot more. So
yeah, sometimes what's going on globally will have an effect on how busy the guys are, and sometimes one thing I really like and admire about the guys at the unit, they're very proactive. So they are always thinking about what potentially is coming up next, and they're preparing for it, which is pretty impressive, because oftentimes they are so much farther ahead than the decision makers, right? And you know, not to cast shade on anybody, but sometimes decision makers are not even fully aware because they're down and in. But the guys at the unit are very proactive and have a forethought process where they're already looking like, well, man, based on what's happening right now, we better get prepared for that, or we better brush up on these skills just in case things, you know, implode. And a lot of times it will come to fruition, maybe 6 months down the road, maybe 9 months down the road. It's like, man, we saw it coming. Guys were already relatively well prepared for it.
Wow. And is that just experience that is teaching them that this might happen, or, you know, this might be coming down the line, we should prepare for it? Like, how do they have that foresight?
A little bit of experience and a little bit of, they're well dialed into what's happening globally, so they'll ask really good questions. And then, you know, we're so fortunate at the unit where we have, you know, really smart people that are dedicated to collect information. And, you know, these intelligence operators they're always proactive, open source stuff, but then also stuff that is not available on open source. And when they get that information, they know how to package in such a way that when dudes like myself get it, you can actually absorb it and it's digestible, right? It's like, okay, what does all of this mean?
What do I do?
What do I do with this? Yeah, what do I do with this? Because, you know, one thing that's worthwhile mentioning, I think, is when it comes to information, similar to, you know, drugs or alcohol or shitty food, too much of anything can be problematic. Information is no different. So sometimes we'll get bombarded with, you know, shreds and shreds of information, and then trying to sift through it to figure out what does any of it mean. Most importantly, what can we do about it? Like, what is actionable with all of this information? So one thing the guys at the unit are really good at is being proactive in terms of sifting through the bullshit and then picking out the stuff that is actually important and then doing something about it.
Right.
Yeah, so really, really impressive, actually. Yeah.
Have you had any people reach out to you recently for your opinion on what's happening in the world right now?
Yeah, actually, the last probably 3 months or so, I've had a lot of requests for a lot of interesting things. when the convoy rally was going on in Ottawa, I got reached out to on several occasions for personal protection, close protection, either from myself or if I knew somebody that ran a business that could help them with personal protection. People were nervous. So I had a few of those questions come in and requests. And then when Ukraine kicked off, I had a couple of requests. The initial request was interesting. It was, there was a group of people that were forward in Ukraine in the beginning stages of trying to get organized, and a lot of good people trying to do good things. But what they needed and what the request came in from me was, would you go over there and just help them get set up, just get organized, because what they need is some direction. A lot of people coming in with aid, with money, with good ideas, but it was disjointed and a little bit unorganized. So the first request was, hey, could you provide some advisory assistance, right? Basically is what it was. I'm like, okay. So that was one request. Another request a few weeks later was, could I provide, or did I have somebody that had the ability to provide TCCC, so like medical care. So it's referred to as tactical combat casualty care. And it's a level of medical training that a lot of Canadian Armed Forces receive. And then people that are, under the umbrella of CANSOF-COM, they receive even heightened levels of advanced medical care. So they have that education, they have that training. So the request came to me, hey, could you come over, either yourself or somebody else, to help with medical triage? And I was like, geez, man, there's a lot of requests coming in. And then the most recent one was, again, a loop around for needing some leadership. They just need some direction. People from Canada, people from other nations coming together, trying to do good things, but they just need somebody to kind of guide the ship.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's been interesting. Yeah, the last couple of months, a lot of different requests from a variety of different people with legitimate concerns. Yeah.
And definitely warranted.
Definitely warranted, and it goes to show, like, there's a lot of things going on in the real world right now, and with the massive amounts of information, what's real, what isn't, what's worthwhile reading, what isn't, it can become overwhelming for sure. So like I gave the analogy, information is, very, very similar to, too much orange juice. You drink too much orange juice, that can give you problems, right? Well, too much information can give you problems. It's trying to be able to filter through, like, what's really important based on priorities of what's needed right now, or a hierarchy of dangers, a hierarchy of threats. And then with that information, what can we do about it?
Right.
So talk, spin, talk is bullshit. Like, all of that stuff does nothing but waste people's time. We need to be able to sift through information, take the information that's critical now, and then action something forward. And I'm not trying to oversimplify it. I know, like, when it comes to leadership, when it comes to organization, like, there's a lot to it, but generally speaking, sometimes that information can be overwhelming, and it's very tough to even figure out where to start.
Yeah, and I think that for the average person, which I would consider myself in terms of knowing, like, what's happening in Ukraine right now, like, you open, any news outlet and start reading a little bit, and obviously you're being cherry-picked, the information that you're being given, but there's still just so much of it, but rarely do you see solutions. Like, I feel like the burning question right now is, well, what is the outcome? What's going to end this conflict, or what's going to happen? And I feel like that's, people fearmonger a lot, and obviously it's extremely severe what's happening, but rarely do you see all of the information being condensed, processed, and becoming a solution. And I was curious if, for somebody like you who has so much experience in essentially war, which is kind of what's gonna, coming down the pipe here, do you see solutions more easily? Do you see it with a clearer lens than the average person when you look at something like a major conflict like this? Or do you also just see, like, a ton of information and realize there's a lot more to it than what we see in the news, and you're just also kind of waiting to see what happens?
Yes, to answer your question, there's a lot more to it. I know. War is a very lucrative business. It is a business. There are people who are going to get paid huge when there's mass turmoil, and we're talking, like, major components of artillery, armament, like, ammunition, weapon systems. This is big dollar stuff, big dollar stuff. And depending on who the major players are, war can be very lucrative for a lot of people. So I can see this playing out a few different ways. And the unfortunate circumstance and reality is innocent people are going to lose their lives in the middle of it. And it's unfortunate and it's a shame, but that is the reality of war. And I think there's a few ways that this can unfold, and regardless of what side you're choosing to pick, which that is a conversation on its own, but I think it's wise for people to know that there's multiple layers. What causes a war? What kicks off a war? There are multiple layers. There are multiple players, and to say poor Ukraine because of what's going on. Sure, there's a component of that. You don't like to see innocent kids get hurt, of course. You don't like to see things happen to animals, of course. Like, this is not good for anybody. But there are multiple layers to it, and we don't fully know what caused the beginning riff of this situation. We don't know. There are things that are being projected in the media that will wager your belief one way or another, but there are multiple layers to it. On the Russian side as well, like, there are good, innocent Russian folks who just want to live their life. They just want to get on with life. They don't want to be involved with this. But what happens is they're good citizens, good country folk that are part of Russia, but because they're part of Russia, they're automatically condensed into this negative light, which is unfortunate, right? So there's multiple layers to these things. Ultimately, from my experience, it usually comes down to a handful of key players. There's usually a handful of key players that are towing on the puppet strings, and then everybody else just happens to be connected to those strings, which is an unfortunate truth. How this plays out, how this unfolds, I really don't know. And I don't have the bandwidth right now to even put too much energy into it, simply because A, I'm not that interested, and B, I'm more interested in what's going on in Canada right now. I am more interested in unfucking this country right now than I am putting any effort into another country that needs to be unfucked, to be completely honest. So when people ask me, I don't get too emotional about it, but I'll say, man, I empathize, and I truly, wish nothing negative upon anybody, and, I wish this would all go away. The reality is, I just don't have the bandwidth to put the energy into it right now. My energy is based on Canadians, good Canadian people trying to do good Canadian things. That's what I'm focused on, and that's what my energy is on right now. Our country it's upside down right now, and it needs some good leadership, and it needs some good Canadians to step up and take accountability for how fucked up things are right now. And until that happens, your government's going to throw money at the problem. Look at us. Look what we've done. We've dedicated so much money. Listen, like, money doesn't fix the problem, man. In these circumstances, like, based on my experience, you can throw as much money as you want. It's not going to fix the problem. We need to get to the root of the problem, and then start turning, if you want to use that money for something good, start turning that money into something that's tangibly actionable, so people can get behind it and start to believe in something. So people are like, what's your solution? Okay, sure, what's the solution? Because I've had this conversation on more than one occasion in the last 10 days. Take that $100 million that was just dedicated to the Ukraine cause, which it's got good intentions, I get it. But how about you take even just a portion of that money, take it a portion of it. You look inside, and because I have strong ties to the Canadian Armed Forces, I'll use it as an example. The Canadian Armed Forces right now are struggling. They're struggling to recruit, they're struggling to retain members, they're struggling to motivate their members. Why don't you take some of that money and you provide some good quality training for these folks that are longing for it. They want this. They want some training. They would be motivated to receive some high quality training. And $100 million can pay for a lot of bullets and a lot of good training for our infantry, for our artillerymen, for our armor, for our combat fighting force. Why don't you take that money and generate it into some motivation? That's what I would recommend. you know?
Right.
And, you know, oftentimes people will push back. Well, it's a different pot of money. Is it? Is it? It's got to come from somewhere. And where is it coming from? Taxpayers.
Right.
Okay. So as a taxpayer and as a you know, a former serving of a member of this Canadian Armed Forces, I can tell you, training needs to improve, right? There's an opportunity. Take some of this money and give these folks what they want, motivate them to stay in uniform. You know, right now there's no motivation. Well, very little motivation because they see the writing on the wall. You know, they get deployed and doing a job that they don't really believe in, or don't see that the effect that they're having is really, you know, anything that they can get behind. So they're losing their motivation, and either they're sticking around just because it's a safety net and they're getting paid every 2 weeks, which is brutal, or they're not sticking around because they know that they have so much more to offer and they're going to do it somewhere else. So that's what I would provide as a solution to the potential problem. Is it going to fix all the problems? No, of course not. But it's definitely going to help.
It's a step in the right direction.
It's a step in the right direction. I do believe. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when it comes to the Ukraine incident or situation right now, that's kind of the conversation I've had over the last little while. You know, I know people don't like to hear that, but I'm not worried about your feelings, man. Like, I'm worried about this country. And you know, if you agree, great. If you disagree, that's okay too. But my concern is, you know, the people of this country first and foremost.
That makes sense.
Yeah, but anyway, any other components or pieces of this particular chat before we wrap it up?
I don't think so. I feel like that was just a good kind of overview of the first question, a lot about the Canadian Armed Forces, maybe answered some questions for people, which is huge. I bet you people do want to ask often about the family side of things, and maybe they're like a little shy to ask.
You know what, I think, and it's a legitimate question, because if there's somebody out there that is considering trying out, but they just don't know how hard it's going to be on their family, that's a really good question. And you have the right to know that it is demanding on the family. It is, you know, like everything, there's ebbs and flows, but having a strong support structure at home will definitely help. And then also being able to, you know, lean on your family member, but also be there for your family member is really important too, because when, like, being the guy that was away a lot, when I did get married, you know, and then I had a little girl, things did change a little bit. But one thing that was really cool, and I was lucky, I think, is that my wife was, and she certainly still is, very supportive, where she would often say, you know, I'd apologize, I'm on the road again, sorry babe, I gotta go again, I apologize. And she'd say, that's okay. She's like, I know it's not forever. She's like, I know you're doing this now, but she's like, you're not gonna do this forever, so it's okay. She was very accepting to it. So what I did was I made sure when I was home, and I was present, and I was all in. So whatever the kids want, or, you know, my wife and little girl wanted to do, no problem, let's do that. You know, that way, when I was home, I wasn't thinking or distracted by what's coming next. I knew there was always a list of things that were coming at work. I knew that wasn't ever going to change. But what I started to do was, when I was home, be where my feet are, be in the moment, be as present as I possibly could with my wife and little girl, because I knew just a matter of time. Once I go back to work, I'm on another trip, or I'm doing another thing, or, you know, somebody needs something else from me, right? So having a strong support structure at home definitely helps, for sure. And know that if you are seriously contemplating life in the Special Forces, have that hard conversation with your wife or significant other beforehand. Know that there are going to be times where it's tough, there's a struggle, but have that conversation beforehand. That way, when it does come to the surface, which it will, it's a little bit more manageable, right? You've had that conversation, and you have some outlets in place, or you have some protocols in place that you've created as a family. So when those troublesome times do come to the surface, you can handle it. You can handle it with a little bit more ease. That's what I would recommend. Yeah.
I think that's huge. I think that's really solid advice. Probably a lot less commonly spoken of than all the other fun stuff, like your gear loadout video and all those things that
people love
float
the
to the
kit.
surface the most. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. People love the kit, that's for sure. But you're right. I think some of these more important things need to be, those conversations need to be had as well. The kit is just a thing. It's just a firearm. It's just a thing to do your job. You know, jumping out of airplanes, is it sexy? Is it fun? Sure. It's just a means to get to the job. You know, we have to be solid, between the ears, so when we get to the job, we can do the job. And if we're struggling at home, sometimes that's going to have an effect on the way we're performing on the job. And if we are unhappy on the job, that's going to have an effect on how we're performing at home. So we need to have those two hard conversations and really prioritize what's the most important thing right now, where can I be, where are my feet at right now, and what needs my dedicated attention right now. And if we can kind of compartmentalize that and break that down, you'll find, and I can't speak for everybody, but I know that's what's worked well for me, being able to compartmentalize it when I go to work, and it was work, like it was my job. I loved every minute of it. So it never felt like work, but I chose to use the word work because that's what I was doing for a living. That was my work. And then when I left work, I literally would drive out the gate at work and I would look in my rearview mirror and I would look at the rearview gate and I'd say, I'll see you tomorrow. And then that was my checkout. So I'll see you tomorrow. Check out. And then as I'm driving home, I'm preparing for my life at home. And that's the way I segmented it. And then the reverse, I'd leave my home in the morning and give my wife a kiss, or if they're still sleeping, I'd blow them an air kiss, I'll see you later, right? I'll see you later. And then I would look in the rearview mirror, and that was my routine. And I literally would look in the rearview mirror, see you later. And then as I'm getting to work, I know what's coming, so I'm already preparing myself. I'm like, all right, I need to do this, I gotta make sure I check in with that person, follow up with this, blah, blah, blah. So I was already pre-planning as I was leading into work, but I really made a good habit to compartmentalize that. Work was work, home was home, and I really tried hard not to bring those two together.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's a very healthy mindset.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It
That might resonate with a lot of people.
I hope so. I mean,
that way.
It worked well for me, and because we're human and sometimes we get really emotionally attached to certain things. Of course, like there was times where shit was happening at home that I might bring some of that residue with me, and then vice versa. Sometimes shit would happen at work, I might bring that residue home with me, but not very often. I did a really good job, I think, being disciplined with, hey man, that problem, whatever it is, it's still gonna be there tomorrow. Let's worry about it tomorrow. Right now, I need to be with my family, Yeah. So that worked well for me.
That's huge.
Yeah.
No, I think that was an awesome conversation, Randy. Really good insights. I think people are going to benefit a lot from hearing those things from somebody like you.
Well, I hope so, and that's why we do with this, some of these questions that you guys ask, we know that there's interest in what was it like to be, a special forces soldier. But keep in mind too, like Sam is a wealth of knowledge, and even questions that you may ask Sam that have to do with something that I went through, she has great insight, and this is meant for you, right? So when we have these conversations, this is for the viewers, and if there's one little nugget that shares with you, or one little nugget that Sam shares, or one little nugget that I share, then everyone's going to benefit from it. So hopefully it's it's benefit added and value added, and if it's not, well, tell somebody else.
That's right. Everybody should just keep sharing, keep talking. Conversation is what we need more of. We need more open conversations, more discussion.
Yeah, good conversation, good discussion, and really trying to keep it positive. Always try to end on something on a high note, because there's so much negativity going on in the world. It's tough to avoid it. It's tough to navigate through the waters of negativity. But if you have the choice, then Sam and I have these conversations offline very often. We have the choice to smile. So smile. You have the choice to be a grumpy bum and bring everybody down around you, because body language speaks volumes. But we also have the choice to smile and say, you know what? It can always be a lot worse. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's an awesome note to end on, really.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right on. Thanks, Sam. All right, guys, keep tuning in, and thanks again for tuning in. Thanks again for the support and lots of questions. Keep the comments coming and the questions, and we'll keep addressing.